Alright, so this is the new shot that we will be tracking, and I want to go over that really fast just with automatic tracking because I want to show you something else. So the tracking will be very fast and I don't want to talk that much again, so I just rush over that. So let me go to SynthEyes and open up that shot. Of course, I've already exported that as a TGA sequence. Open. NTSC, of course. Okay. And it is not too long. It's also not too shaky. So I think we can get away with automatic tracking. And I really want to rush that now. Just press that big auto button. Alright. Tracking is done really fast. You can see we have some errors here, so I want to clean some of these up just by doing the cleanup trackers, fix them, resolve. Okay, even better now. Now maybe let's calculate the lens distortion. Calculate, go. Okay, much better now. Clean up again. Maybe reduce the threshold here, increase the threshold there, fix bad frames, and I think we should be done here. Okay, we are now at 0.5. Maybe we can get it even lower. Fix that, go. Alright, 0.4, that is great. Let's test that by first orienting the scene. Maybe in full screen, and pick some trackers on the floor. First enable the 3D point selection. Okay, pixel origin, that one, axis point here, plane point there, nice triangle. Alright, apply coordinate system. Perfect, everything is here on the floor. We go full screen and then go through the shot. All of these trackers make sense. There are no spiky things, so it looks pretty much alright. Let's have a look at the lens distortion. 0.01, that is very similar to the distortions that I had in the other shots, and that's good because I had been using the same camera, so that's great. Then go back to quad view and have a look at this. Because just like as in the other shot, I want to change the rotation, but also the scale of the scene. Because if you go here, insert a box, and then have a look at the scale factor here, then you can see that we had to scale it up to 23 units to have it only that big. And well, if you export that to your 3D application, then that might be really, really large, considering that you are working with units as meters. So now we have a box that is 23 meters, but our room is, I think, just like 10 meters or so. So, of course, we could go ahead and make sure whole is selected, grab our scale tool, and then scale the camera. That will also scale the scene. But there's a much better, more precise and easier way to do that. And that is to use constrained points. And for that we can go here, switch to the constrained point layout. And here you can see our 3 points that are defining our coordinate system. And you can see that if you select this one, which is our left-right or the axis point, then it is set to x equals 20. Let's switch back to the coordinate system panel, because that means that this point is now 20 units away from this one. So that would be 20 meters. But in real life, I would say this is just 1 or 1.5 meters. So we have to adjust that, and we can do that by selecting this point. And then down here in the seed and log panels, we can choose the X point and then simply click and drag and change that to 1.5 meters. Now we have to resolve, and because I'm lazy, I don't want to go back here and then click go. We can just hit Shift G. That's easier. Okay, now I want to get rid of that box, and you can already see this is much smaller. Now let's right click and then zoom to fill, and come back here and insert a box. If you do that, then you can see if you scale it up to roughly 1 meter, then that makes perfect sense in our viewport. So that's a way to quickly adjust the size of your scene so that you can easily work with that in your 3D application. And of course, if you have been on set and have been able to put markers in your scene and measure the distance between them, then you can get a really precise camera solution when you are using these markers as your origin, axis and plane point. But it is not always possible to put markers in your scene, but you might happen to know the exact distance between or the exact width of the door frame. So maybe let's just assume that we do know that this door frame is 1 meter. And let me quickly set this back to 20 so that we can simulate our initial solve. Shift G to resolve that shot. Okay, now we are back at 20. Okay, so if we know that this is 1 meter, we have to insert 2 trackers here, maybe for this point and for this point, and let me quickly do that. Okay, so I have these 2 trackers here, and I want to resolve the scene just by hitting Shift G. And you can see that these 2 trackers have actually been able to improve the whole solution, so that's great. And now we can go to that coordinate system panel, select the axis point, this one down here, and then we need to get rid of that x equals 20 constraint. And we can do that if you switch this point from a log point to just on x-axis. And now SynthEyes knows it is on that x-axis, but without giving it that size constraint. So instead we want to pick first that tracker, then hold down the command key and then select this one. And maybe you can see this little line between them. And that means that now this point is constrained to that one. You can see that here. And we can now go ahead and insert a distance value. Let's set this to 1 meter. And if you hit now Shift G to resolve, then you can see we have the same result, although unfortunately rotated the wrong way, but we can easily fix that. But we have that correct size now, and it's still there on the floor, so that is great. Okay, let's go ahead and rotate that quickly, because the rotation around the z-axis is always a very easy thing to do. And that way you can very easily set up the size of the scene without having to know the exact distance between the origin and the axis point. But of course it's important that you turn off that x-axis value for that axis point before you set up a new size. Because then you would have, that would just confuse SynthEyes, because on the one hand you're telling SynthEyes, hey, this is 20 meters, and on the other hand, this is suddenly just 1 meter, so that doesn't make any sense. It would give just errors. So it's important that if you are doing that you first disable the x constraint for that axis point, just by going ahead and switching from log point to on x-axis, and then you can choose any of these 2 trackers, and by command clicking on the next one, you can constrain that tracker to it and set up that distance value. As a side note, I should mention that if you are going to export to a compositing application like, for example, After Effects or Maya Composite, formerly known as Toxic, then you should be careful about the distance value, because especially After Effects and Toxic, they are not using meters, they are using pixels. So if you set up a distance constraint of 1, then that would mean for that compositing application that this is 1 pixel. So if you want to adjust the position of that object, then you have to deal with very, very low numbers. And that can be really problematic and difficult to work with. So in that case, if you're working with After Effects or Toxic or any application like that, then you might want to use 100 pixels instead of 1 meter for that distance constraint. But you also have to see which values are best for you, and also that depends a lot on your scene. But you should just keep in mind that normally 3D applications work with meters, but a compositing application might work with pixels instead. So if you have unexpected results, considering the size of your scene, you could just try to multiply your distance values with, let's say, 100. So now we have the size of the scene. We do know where these 2 points are, or where that door frame exactly is, but do we know, for example, where this corner is exactly? No. Do we know the exact height of that door frame? No. So there are still a lot of things that we do not know where exactly some things are in that scene. To change that, of course, you could just insert manual trackers and resolve the scene and so on. But there's another very cool way to do that. Let's come back to Quad View. And sure, I mean, you do have to do some manual tracking, but you don't have to resolve the scene, because that error value is pretty fine. I'm really happy with that solution, so I don't want to change that, but I do want to know where these corners are exactly, and for example, where is that corner, where is that one, and so on. To do that, you can use zero-weighted trackers. And that means that if you go to the tracker panel, and now because my screen is too small for that tutorial, I have to float the play bar, bring that over here. You can, if you insert a tracker, here for example, you can set it to zero-weighted tracker. And that means although it will track the scene, it will insert a 3D point, it will not apply to that camera solution and will in fact insert a 3D point without solving, because it will just rely on that existing solution that we already have. Okay, so to do that, enable zero-weighted tracker, or maybe, excuse me, let's go on the start frame, although it doesn't really matter, but insert that here. In that corner, enable zero-weighted tracker, and now start tracking. And if you look here, you can see that now we have a red cross wandering around that screen. And that is the 3D point converging to its final destination. So it doesn't move anymore, so we know that this is the exact position, and you can stop the tracking and lock that up. And now we have the exact position of that corner according to this particular camera solution. And that is awesome. So let's do that again. Maybe for that corner here. I think it should be here. Maybe let's zoom in. Yeah, okay. So this is that corner. Maybe zoom out to see that tracker a little bit better. And then make sure it is set to zero-weighted tracker. Hit go. And then watch that tracker converging to that position. And then after 100 or 150 frames, it has finally arrived in its final destination. So lock that, and that way we can really remodel that whole scene just by inserting supervised trackers that we set to 0-weighted tracker and then wait until that tracker has arrived in that position. And of course you still have to supervise that tracker, because when it suddenly jumps off, maybe we can simulate that by setting it manually to a completely wrong place. Then you can see how it suddenly starts to move to a different position, because it will take into account that new position of that tracker, and of course that will lead to high errors. But if you then go back here where it is still alright, and if you watch that, when you close that tracker, or if you cut that off here, then it will be on that position where SynthEyes has calculated it on that frame. So lock that up. Now we have that corner. Move on to the next. And of course, I mean, we can do that to the whole scene. We can remodel everything just by inserting supervised trackers. But, well, that might be a bit tedious to do that for the whole scene. So there's another feature which is even cooler. And that is, let's say we want to have something that covers all these tires here. For example, I don't know, maybe there's a plane covering that, or a cloth laying over that, or whatever. Or, I mean, if that is not this scene, but, I don't know, a mountain scene, or an environment, a desert, or whatever, then you can do something that will create almost the exact same shape of these objects. And that is to add many trackers. You can do that by going up here, track, and then add many trackers. But before I can do that, I have to compute the blips again. Because during that clean up trackers, I've also cleared all the blips. So I have to quickly go ahead and recalculate them for all the frames. Okay, let's go full screen and maybe bring that here. And we can now lasso select them. In fact, we don't need to be in that blips feature panel. We can just lasso here, select all these tires roughly. And even though there's nothing happened yet, we can now go ahead to track, add many trackers. And currently there would be 37,000 trackers, but we only want these trackers to be within that lasso. So there will be 4,000 trackers. Now click add, and there they are. Now we really have a bunch of trackers, and when you export that, of course you can use that to remodel your scene. But we are not stopping here. It gets even cooler, because you don't even have to model that by hand. You can let SynthEyes do the job for you. Let's switch to perspective view. And maybe first let's set down the world size so that it looks a bit more reasonable, like 10. All right. Okay, now we still have all these trackers enabled. Maybe let's have a look at them from, not from the camera, but from perspective. So we click L or right click and disable lock to current camera. Hold down the command key and then left click and drag to orbit around. You can really see that shape here, which has been formed by these tires. And let's zoom out with our mouse wheel. Okay. And the cool thing is, if you press the right mouse button now and then go to mesh operations, you can now convert these triangles, these trackers, to a mesh. And after that, you can, if you look from the top view, which is preferable, then you can go right click, mesh operations, triangulate. And now you have a mesh that is exactly in that same spot of these tires. And if you export that and then use some tessellation or subdivision surfaces, then it will be really a nice surface covering these tires. Let's have a look at that from camera view. So click L again. Now you can really see we have that object sitting there. And that's just great. And if you export that, of course, that mesh will also be in your 3D application. But it gets even cooler, because if you right click, select that and right click and set this as edit mesh, then you can go ahead and right click, go texturing, and then choose between rolling front projection, or maybe we go to a different frame here, maybe that one, then select texturing frozen front projection, and now you have that image camera mapped to that mesh. So if you deselect that mesh by clicking here, it seems as if nothing would have happened. But if you now go through the shot and maybe disable these trackers by hitting J, then it looks a bit weird. But you really have to look closely to see what happens. And well, this is just a simulation of what you can do in your 3D or compositing application. But the point is, you can simulate that here and try if it works. Okay, now you might ask, why would I want to do that? And there are a number of reasons. And one of the reasons is that with this method you can cover errors in your movie. So for example, and I have had that while shooting there, so maybe there's a bird flying through that room during your shot. So you want to get rid of that bird, or I don't know, maybe something's happening, you know? Then you can just cover that region with that projected mesh and it will be gone. To simulate that, I have created something that enters that room and leaves it again. And I want to quickly show you that by going to Shot, change Shot Images, and then choose Other. Don't do anything special. I really just want to change the images. Then click OK, and then choose that footage. Okay, then open that, quickly set OK. And then maybe for a second hide this object. Go here and then click hide. And if we now go through that shot, you can see that we have that little monkey head very poorly composited into that shot. But the point is, I just want to see if we can get rid of that. We can show that object, and our pink monkey head is almost covered. So it seems to work, and of course to get rid of these artifacts you would have to adjust that mesh in your compositing application or your 3D application. Some subsurfing, tessellation, some refinement, and then you will have that shape and it will cover this region, and that way you can get rid of this pink monkey head. So that's one way that you can use that. Another way would maybe to just roughly remodel that floor, paint something on a frame of your movie and just project that onto your mesh. That way you can use this method for matte painting or for, for a bunch of different things. The point is, with texturing and SynthEyes, you can simulate that and it works really well. Okay, now to finish this shot, I want to set some of the trackers exportable. So maybe I go back to quad view and then switch the trackers back on again with J, and maybe we can use these ones, the door frame, some of them here on that floor, of course some here on that column, maybe here, maybe that piece of the floor, here, that area. Let's see if we need more, maybe that building here, that wall back there. Okay, also these ones. And because we are exporting that mesh also, we don't need to activate any of these. So let's now hit Command, or on your PC side, Control or Command I to invert the selection. Then come here to that coordinate system panel and then disable exportable for all these trackers. And now we can go ahead and export that file to, in my case, Blender. Version 2, yeah, save.